My name is Clara Jensen. I'm 39 years old, and once upon a time, I designed the system that moves this train. Not this exact one, no, but the nervous system beneath it. The fail-safes, the feedback loops, the black line protocols. I built them when I still believed safety and politics could sit in the same room. Now I ride trains like anyone else, silent, unseen, invisible by choice. We were boarding the 0900 Express from Berlin to Zurich. My brother, Elliot, walked 3 steps ahead, as usual. He dressed like someone auditioning for his own documentary. Steel gray coat, sharp collar, the smug confidence of someone who believed the world was still orbiting his will. To his credit, in most rooms, it did. We weren't close. We hadn't been in years. But after the funeral, we had unfinished business, papers to sign, accounts to reconcile. He insisted we travel together, as if that might imply unity. It didn't. It just gave him a stage. He dropped his coat across the aisle seat in car 3 and gestured for me to take the window. I didn't argue. He liked power displays, no matter how small. I gave him the stage and took the silence. As we settled in, he glanced down at the notebook in my lap. "You still carry that thing around?" he asked. I didn't answer. He leaned back, eyeing me sideways with that half-smile that had once won voters and courtrooms alike. "You know, Clara, you used to terrify people in those meetings. You'd quote subroutines like scripture and stare people down if they suggested a shortcut." I opened to a blank page and clicked my pen. He chuckled. "Still logging everything, huh? For what? Some audit of the soul?" I didn't look at him. I wrote, "Aero 838, boarding complete. Elliot already performing." He tilted his head, pretending amusement, but I saw it, the flicker of something unsettled. He hated that I never argued. Silence to him was not surrender. It was unreadable, and therefore, unacceptable. "You know," he went on, "I read that article about you last year. That ethics piece, the old file, it's still floating around. You can't kill a ghost once it's out." Still, I said nothing. The train started to hum beneath us. I felt the familiar rhythm of the subline motors engaging, the subtle oscillation of voltage stabilizing across the spine of the car. Elliot turned his attention to his tablet. I watched his reflection in the window glass, shoulders back, smirk loaded, tapping an email with the ease of someone writing his own narrative. He had once called my career a phase. He said my work in safety systems was admirable, but impractical. "Policy is about negotiation," he said. "You don't negotiate with circuits." I did. I always had. That morning, he asked for coffee from the attendant and made a point of requesting the brand he knew they didn't stock, then feigned disappointment when they didn't have it. The small theater of superiority. He glanced back at me, still sipping the wrong coffee, still certain the world bent politely to his credentials. "You never answered," he said. "About what?" "Why you never cleared your name. You had offers, interviews, panels, maybe even another advisory role, but you chose to disappear." "I didn't disappear," I said quietly. "I disengaged." He snorted. "Same thing." I let the silence return. Sometimes it's a better teacher than dialogue. Outside the window, the trees blurred into a smear of spring green and industrial gray. The hum of the tracks deepened. Somewhere behind us, a baby began to fuss. Someone coughed twice, dry and tight. Elliot stretched, then lowered his voice. "Dad always said you were the smartest one, but he also said smart doesn't always mean stable." There it was, the line he'd used when he forwarded that old ethics report. I had seen the metadata. He'd sent it to the advisory board's general counsel before the board ever convened. His note was short. Might be relevant, given her temperament. Temperament. That word had followed me like smoke ever since. I wrote, 0849. Elliot circled back to the file. He noticed me writing again and chuckled. You know, most people would have sued me by now. I'm not most people. No, he said. You're not. We sat in silence again. Then, as we crossed into the Brandenburg district, the car jolted. Not the usual rhythmic bounce of a rail seam. This was different, sharper, uninvited. The lights flickered once. The hum shifted pitch. I looked up. So did Elliot. What was that? He asked, frowning. From somewhere near the front of the train, a muffled alert tone buzzed. The overhead display froze, then blinked erratically. Passengers stirred. One woman called out to the conductor. A steward moved past us quickly, whispering into a headset. Then, another jolt, harder. The cabin tilted. Bags shifted in overhead bins. Elliot grabbed the edge of his seat. What the hell? A sharp mechanical whine sliced through the car. The lights turned amber. Then, whoomp! An explosive pop from the front axle. A woman screamed. The intercom crackled, distorted and panicked. Then a voice cut through. Is Dr. Jensen in car 3? Get me Clara Jensen now. I felt my stomach drop. Elliot turned to me slowly, as if the name were a hallucination. What did they just... But I was already standing. The hum beneath my feet wasn't humming anymore. It was groaning. I walked past him without looking back. He called after me, voice low, unsure now. Clara, what are you doing? I didn't answer. Some moments don't wait for explanations. They just ask one question. Do you remember what you built? I did. And now, the system was calling its architect. I moved quickly down the aisle, the vibrations beneath my feet shifting from mechanical hum to something more unstable, like the spine of the train was bracing itself. Passengers stared as I passed. Some with confusion, others with fear. No one stopped me. People don't stop someone who walks like they know where they're going. It's a trick I learned in my early years. Confidence isn't always a feeling. Sometimes it's choreography. The conductor met me at the junction between cars 2 and 1, his face pale, lips tight. Dr. Jensen? I nodded. He didn't ask for ID. He just stepped aside. The front cabin door hissed open, revealing the control room. It was chaos. One of the operators, barely out of his 20s, was slumped in the chair to the right, an oxygen mask awkwardly pressed to his face, eyes half-lidded. The older conductor was pacing between panels, pressing buttons that lit up and died just as fast. Warning lights strobed across the ceiling. A high-pitched tone pulsed in a slow, terrifying rhythm. Systems failing, the older one said. We lost primary braking. Auto is unresponsive. We tried override, but... I stepped past him, toward the central panel. The screen was glitching. The input streams jittered, latitude data ghosting, brake pressure readings flatlined, sensor feedback looping on a 3-second delay. I'd seen this pattern before. Not just malfunction, intrusion. You're being jammed, I said quietly. It's a protocol breach, not mechanical failure. The older conductor stared at me, stunned. You designed this system? I didn't answer. I was already moving. My hands hovered over the control console, bypassing the default panels. I flipped a hidden tab beneath the dash, revealing a narrow slot. One that shouldn't have existed on civilian trains. Blackline mode, the last resort system. Off-grid. Manual override. A mechanism I had fought to include during the system's infancy, after witnessing a similar failure during a NATO simulation. I never thought it would be used. Certainly not like this. Do you still have the emergency key codebook? I asked. The conductor blinked. Yes. Yes. Locked behind the panel. Open it. I'll need authentication to activate Blackline. He hesitated, then turned, reaching for a secondary panel. As he did, I looked at the young operator slumped in the seat. His face was sweating, pulse faint. "Call the medical attendant," I said. "Get him out of here, he's not stabilizing." The conductor relayed the command. Two stewards arrived seconds later, wheeling in a portable stretcher. While they worked, I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved the one item I never stopped carrying: my old logbook. It was small, black leather, lined, no logos. Inside were pages of field notes, access strings, outdated code structures, scribbled in my own shorthand. A relic of a past I wasn't allowed to reference publicly anymore. The conductor returned with the codebook. I opened both side by side, his for confirmation, mine for memory. "Do you know what you're doing?" he asked. I glanced up at him. "If I didn't," I said calmly, "you wouldn't have heard your own system call my name." He didn't speak again. I input the first key manually. The system stuttered, then paused. Black line mode, pending activation. Voice authentication required. I leaned toward the mic and spoke clearly. "Dr. Clara Jensen, override authorization, emergency code Delta Echo 11, initiate black line." The lights flickered. Then, black line mode. Active. Switching to manual control. The screen changed. No more flashing warnings, no more ghosted data, just raw inputs. Brake pressure, velocity, incline, friction coefficients, distance to next grade threshold. It was beautiful, terrifying, familiar. I sat in the chair beside the console and rolled up my sleeves. "You're in control," the conductor said, almost reverently. No, I wasn't in control. I was in responsibility. There's a difference. I didn't ask what the central command was saying. I didn't check if they were trying to reach us. I knew the interference was still active. We were alone out here, and we were moving too fast. "Get me the weight distribution logs for the last 3 minutes," I said. The conductor printed them on thin thermal paper. I read them like a heartbeat. Peaks, troughs, tremors. "Someone's off balance," I muttered. "You mean the load?" "No, the code." I opened a new window and pulled the routing logic. What I saw made my stomach tighten. Rogue inputs, not from onboard systems. Someone had seeded the protocol weeks ago. This wasn't just a failure, it was planted. Why? Who? I didn't have time to ask. Behind me, the conductor said, "Central control's not answering. Dead air." "Then we treat this as a closed system." Which means I don't care what they think is happening. We fly this train from here. Alone. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I began recalibrating the brake distribution. I whispered to myself as I worked, something I'd learned back in the early days. Speed is truth. Noise is narrative. Data never lies. Outside the control room, I saw Elliot. He was standing just beyond the glass divider, gripping the doorframe, staring at me like I was someone he hadn't seen in years. Maybe he hadn't. He mouthed something I didn't hear. Then the conductor said softly, "We're about to hit a descending grade." "How steep?" 2.3% drop over 6 kilometers. Ah, I looked at the friction curve. If we entered at current velocity, we'd never stop in time. The auto brakes would have calculated a deceleration arc, but we no longer had them. "I need to regulate descent manually," I said. "Adjust the brake phase in reverse. Counterpulse every 20 seconds to reduce inertia." "You'll shear the pads," he warned. "I know." I reached for the manual brake levers. They were stiff, dusty, neglected, perfect. As I gripped them, I heard the system whisper one final word before going fully silent. Offline. Which meant no help, no backup. Just me, the steel beneath us, and a drop ahead no one else could see yet. The wheels began to howl. Not the mechanical squeal of turns or the distant groan of friction. This was different, a rising guttural sound like the train itself had realized it no longer knew how to stop. We were approaching the incline fast. The rail's descent stretched like a silver tongue into the horizon, and I felt it. The subtle shift of weight as gravity reached out and took control. "Grade ahead," the conductor warned again, his voice tight. I'd already felt it in my spine. I shifted the manual levers in a micro-motion, barely a nudge, not to halt us, but to feel us. A half-second delay. Then resistance. Then nothing. The brake regulators weren't engaging on the lead car. "Dead channel on 1 and 2, I muttered, scanning the diagnostic rail across the screen. "Slaves are frozen. They're not receiving the pressure redistribution command." The conductor looked down at the same data, eyes widening. "That shouldn't be possible." I glanced at him sideways. Most disasters start with that sentence. The deceleration graph dipped, then curved too sharply downward. We were losing control. And the passengers behind us? They were still unaware of just how little choice remained between velocity and viability. I keyed the internal PA. My hand hovered for a second. Then I hit transmit. "This is Clara Jensen," I said. "We've entered an unplanned descent. The braking system is being managed manually. Please remain seated and belted. Trust the process. Do not panic." I cut the channel before they could hear my breath catch. Behind the glass, I caught a glimpse of Elliot. He was staring at me again, pale now. Gone was the performance, the posture, the smile that could talk down a room of angry lawyers. What was left was just a man, unsteady, unsure, staring at the one person he'd spent years trying to reduce to a footnote. I turned back to the controls. "Can we isolate the pressure to midsection cars?" I asked. The conductor was still watching the data. "We'd have to manually reset the local valves from the coupling joints." "How long?" 4 minutes. I shook my head. "We have less than 2. I pulled up the structural tolerance graph. If we pushed into the next curve at this speed, the rear cars would whip outward. Derailment. That's what was waiting. Not headlines, not hearings. Steel ripping through steel. A quiet voice crackled over the emergency intercom. "We need help in car 5, a steward said. "Passengers collapsed. No pulse. We're administering CPR." I closed my eyes for half a second. Time just collapsed in on itself. "Continue compressions," I said into the mic. "This train is going to stop. We are not dying on a timeline." When I turned around, Elliot had moved. He was now standing closer to the cabin door, watching me through the glass like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. I reached for the trim override. A feature no one remembered was there. It let the system alternate minor pressures across opposing brake pairs to simulate resistance, like rowing against the tide rather than trying to freeze it. It was a patch, not a solution. But patches save lives when perfection is gone. The conductor looked over, surprised. "You think that'll hold us?" "No," I said, "but it'll teach the train how to slow down again." The lever was stiff, but I forced it left. 2 clicks. The frame of the cabin groaned. A fresh scream of friction surged up from the undercarriage. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't elegant, but it was working. For the first time in 10 minutes, the descent rate dipped by 2%. "Do it again," the conductor said. I did. The whole train shivered. Lights flickered, then steadied. The grade ahead was still long, the bend still sharp, and the margin for error still razor thin. But we had found 1 inch of control. And an inch, in motion, is survival. Somewhere behind me, Elliot had entered the control cabin. I didn't turn, but I heard him. "You're really doing this," he said quietly. I didn't answer. "What are you even doing?" he pressed. "There are protocols. There are engineers. They're offline." He hesitated. "So what? You're taking over like some vigilante?" I looked up, finally meeting his eyes. I'm not taking over, I said. I'm returning to what never should have been taken. That shut him up. For a moment, then he said it. The thing that had lived in his throat for years, sharpened and ready to wound. You're unstable under pressure. That's what the report said. That's why they pulled you off the board. I didn't flinch. I wasn't unstable, I said softly. I was uncompromising. That's not how it read. I turned back to the console. Then maybe they should have listened to how it ended. He said nothing. I heard him step back, retreating to the frame of the door like it was safer to watch me from the periphery. It always had been. Clara, the conductor said. We're approaching the bend. I looked at the trajectory forecast, the rail arc ahead, the structural stress estimate. We couldn't take it at full length. We'd snap, unless we shifted weight. Is the emergency spur still active? I asked. The conductor looked shocked. The old military line? That's just a backup sighting. It hasn't been used in decades. Exactly, which means it's clear. Is it still aligned to the main rail? He checked the map. It could work, if we switch the track valve within the next 60 seconds. Do it. He hesitated. That bend is sharper. If we miscalculate, we don't have time to calculate anymore. We have time to decide. He made the call. The switch was confirmed. The track would shift left, onto a route no one had traveled in 20 years. I adjusted the trim again. The resistance screamed back. And yet, we were gliding. Roughly. Unwillingly. But slowing. Back in the main cabin, people were beginning to whisper, to pray, to hold hands across armrests. A woman was sobbing quietly, her face buried in her child's shoulder. But somewhere near car 5, a steward was still pumping a man's chest. Time wasn't running out. It was running toward us. The conductor read the final readings. We're entering the turn. I gripped the manual brake lever, twisted it down, and said quietly, almost reverently, hold. And the train did. Not perfectly, but with enough defiance to tell the ground below. Not yet. The train leaned hard into the emergency spur. Steel groaned like thunder, echoing through the frame of the carriage. Bags dropped from overhead compartments. People cried out, not from injury, but from the raw realization that physics had become personal. We weren't riding a train anymore. We were riding a question. Would it hold? The cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. Dimmer, but stable. Systems that had been spliced and scattered by digital attack were now being rebuilt by one ancient tool: direct input. Unassisted, unaided, and absolutely unforgiving. And I was the one holding the map. The conductor stared at the brake pressure readouts. Clara, we're burning out the traction nodes. I know, I said. And the switchgear's overdue for service. If we shear the last pair of tension lugs, we won't have alignment integrity for the next segment. Then we land before that happens. He blinked. Land? I looked at him, steady. We're not riding this out to the main line. We find our pocket, we touch down, and we shut it all down while we still have the gift of friction. He swallowed, then nodded. That's what I'd learned in war rooms and simulation pods, over endless trials and under whispered doubt. You don't win by outrunning failure. You win by ending the game before the board collapses. The emergency spur leveled for a moment, a quiet reprieve between gravity and fate. I used the gap to reassign priority to the rear brake sequencing. The system fought me, kicking back codes I hadn't seen in a decade. Error, expired, permission denied. I overrode each one manually. The old strings still worked. No one had purged them after I left. They hadn't expected anyone to ever use the system again. Another oversight born from arrogance. The kind of arrogance I used to work beside. The kind my brother had perfected. Speaking of Elliot, he was still there. pressed to the glass of the control cabin, watching like the world had turned inside out. It had. And for once, he wasn't narrating it. I adjusted the descent profile to 3.6 degrees, sharper than ideal, but it would bleed speed faster than the standard curve. The train groaned in protest. I ignored it. The conductor exhaled sharply. That's going to shake the rear cars hard. Better bruised than buried. Outside, the rails began to level again. Just ahead, through a dust-fogged windshield, I saw it. A service yard. Forgotten. Weeds growing through the outer fence. Cracked concrete, yellowed lines from another era. But flat. Long. Wide enough. Right there, I said. The conductor squinted. That strip? It's not rated. It hasn't been used since Cold War exercises, I know. I helped decommission the site. Why's it still connected? Because I fought to keep it that way. He stared at me. You always plan this far ahead? I didn't answer. I just clicked down the manual brake lever again. 2 notches. The train shuddered like something being asked to believe in itself. The conductor keyed the internal mic. All cars, prepare for emergency deceleration. This is not a drill. Brace position advised. The cabin went silent. Not quiet. Silent. That type of hush that only comes when 200 people realize at the exact same second, we might live or die based on someone we've never seen. And that someone was me. I rebalanced the lateral load pressure and opened the friction diagnostics. Rear node 6 was showing structural fatigue. I flagged it mentally. I'd need to ease left on entry. Keep weight on node 3. A trick I'd learned from the simulations no one else passed. Why are you doing this? The conductor asked suddenly, not looking at me. I didn't answer right away. Then softly, because I built it. He looked at me, uncertain. This train? This model? This logic? This layer of the system? This fallback code? This architecture no one believed mattered once auto took over. He said nothing. I kept going. I built this so that if, when, everything else failed, someone could still bring it home. You mean, someone like you? No, I said. Someone like anyone who bothered to learn it. The last mile approached. The service yard loomed, a graveyard of old infrastructure, now a lifeline for 200 souls. Brake temperature hit critical red. I whispered to the control panel like it could hear me. Just 1 more minute. Gimme that. Manual override wasn't responding on the left auxiliary line. I reached under the panel, opened a fuse hatch, and reset the circuit by hand. The conductor gasped. You just hardwired a relay with no gloves. I've burned hotter, I said. Outside, the trees blurred. The train hissed against the rails. Every joint, every bolt, every coupler screamed with fatigue. But we were slowing. Not enough yet. But enough to steer. Now, I said. We land now. You sure? No. But we're out of track. He didn't argue again. We dropped speed to 85 kilometers per hour. Still fast. Still dangerous. But we had geometry. We had concrete. And we had the gift of choice. I keyed the final sequence. Emergency lock override engaged. The train began its approach into the forgotten yard. Too fast, too loud, too raw, but aligned. Everyone brace, the conductor said again. I took a breath. The last one before impact becomes decision. And behind me, I heard Elliot whisper to himself, so soft I almost missed it. Clara. I didn't know. And that was the point. He hadn't wanted to. The first contact with the yard wasn't a landing. It was a collision with possibility. The wheels screamed as they touched the old concrete. Not a screech of brakes, a cry of resistance, of a machine asking its operator one final time. Are you sure? Yes. The emergency track held. Cracked, weather-worn, uneven, but it held. I watched the velocity counter bleed speed in ragged intervals, not the smooth curve engineers dream of. No, this was mechanical protest. This was flesh and metal negotiation, but it was slowing. The conductor read aloud from the gauge cluster, his voice quick and clipped. 72, 68, 62. The cabin shuddered again, harder. One of the rear couplers slammed with a low whump against its limit. A ripple of force moved through the cars like a thrown rope catching slack. I pulled the right brake lever another notch, then corrected manually to the left, shifting balance toward the aging third axle assembly, the one with just enough wear to bite down harder against concrete. We were gliding now, if such a word could be used for something still threatening to break apart at every joint. Rear node 6 failing, the conductor warned. I know, I muttered, eyes tracking the pulse of vibration patterns across the screen. Shift cabin weight forward. Send a crew back to move passengers up 2 rows. They won't all comply. Then explain it simply. Tell them it's physics. He hesitated. Will that be enough? No, I said, adjusting again. But it'll give us seconds. And seconds are life. Behind the cabin, I could hear the growing noise of movement, passengers shifting, footsteps scrambling, whispered prayers and muffled crying. The unmistakable click of seatbelts tightening from those who had realized they were no longer passengers. They were participants in their own survival. And beyond it all, just outside the cabin, Elliot's voice, calmer now, commanding in a different register. He wasn't giving speeches anymore. He was relaying orders, repeating instructions, telling people to move, stay low, breathe. He sounded useful. For once, he wasn't speaking for me or against me. He was speaking because of me. The yard ahead narrowed. Concrete gave way to uneven ballast. The next segment wasn't meant for speed at all. It was a holding track, a dead end. But we weren't trying to go further. We were trying to end. The conductor leaned in. We'll lose the outer wheels if we hit that segment over 60. What are we at now? 52. I studied the terrain, calculated the remaining friction, guessed at the steel's fatigue points like a doctor reading a pulse from a dying patient. Then I made a choice. Dump the auxiliary fuel cells, I said. The conductor turned, startled. That's half the electrical reserve? We're not going anywhere after this. He hesitated, then keyed the release. A subtle clunk echoed from the rear of the train. The weight drop registered instantly, and our speed dipped by 3 more kilometers per hour. Exactly what I needed. I keyed the mic one last time. This is Clara Jensen. Final deceleration underway. Impact speed predicted below fatal threshold. Remain secured. Trust your body. It knows how to survive. I let go of the button. Then, finally, I allowed myself to breathe. It wasn't over, but it was now possible. We entered the final bend of the yard, no longer part of any schedule, any timetable, any network. A relic of a war that never happened, now hosting a battle for life no one had planned. The rails curved left, then right. A shallow zigzag meant to bleed speed from Cold War convoys arriving hot. Perfect. I leaned into the controls, shifting brake balance every 2 seconds, left, center, right, dispersing the remaining energy like a boxer absorbing punches across his guard. 38, 34, the conductor said aloud, his voice trembling. The cabin vibrated like a tuning fork. I felt it in my ribs. Every click of the trim felt hotter, every pull of the lever heavier. And yet, I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I'd trained for so many simulations like this. But the one thing no simulator could ever recreate was the sound of 200 people believing in you without knowing your name. I could feel it. Behind the steel and wires. Hope. It was heavy. Humbling. unshakable. The final rail segment appeared. The end of the line. Not a metaphor. A wall. Beyond it, nothing. The conductor leaned in again. Emergency brakes? Not yet, I said. Why? Because they're drama. And drama kills. I waited 2 more seconds, then yanked the lever hard, full brake engagement. The train roared, sparks erupted beneath us. The floor vibrated violently. The back cars shook like loose teeth. The conductor screamed out, 15, 10, and then we stopped. 7 meters short of the wall, just shy of tragedy. Just past the impossible. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. No one moved. Not for a breath. Not for a full 5 seconds. Then, all at once, the sound. Applause. Sobs. Laughter that bordered on hysteria. Hands clutching strangers. Mothers holding their children like they'd just been born again. In the cockpit, I simply sat still. Hands still on the brake lever. Still holding the memory of force. Elliot entered, quietly. His voice was hoarse. You did it. I didn't respond. He stepped closer. I never saw this side of you. I turned my head slowly. This isn't a side, I said. This is who I've always been. He swallowed, nodded, then softly, You saved them. No, I said. They survived. I just helped them remember how. Emergency lights spun in slow circles outside the train, red and amber flickering through the cabin windows like a slow-motion fire. Paramedics moved between cars. Some carried stretchers, others oxygen tanks. But most of the passengers were walking out under their own power, silent, stunned, alive. Inside the control cabin, I stayed seated. The brake lever still vibrated faintly beneath my fingers. Residual pressure in the line, a final echo of resistance. Medical's approaching car 5, the conductor said behind me. They've revived the man. CPR worked. I nodded. Didn't smile. Relief is dangerous when you haven't debriefed the failure yet. Elliot stood to my right, one hand still pressed to the glass window like he needed to physically anchor himself to the moment. I think you just rewrote your obituary, he said, his voice trying to find humor again. But it fell flat. I didn't look at him. Obituaries are written by people who outlive you, I said softly. I'm still here. Which means I get to write what comes next. He was quiet. For once, I think he heard the weight behind the words. Outside, the emergency crew was trying to assess the yard's structural integrity. Some walked the length of the rails, scanning the wheels for stress fractures. Others clustered near the rear cars, examining the couplers. But no one was looking at the root cause. That was still humming in the background. Quiet, malicious code embedded in the autologic layer, dormant now that we'd disengaged power, but very much alive. The intrusion had never been about derailing the train. It had been about proving something, testing something. And I had an idea who it might have been for. I stood finely, my knees stiff from the hour in tension. As I moved, my hand brushed against the edge of the console, where a faint red light pulsed once, then went dark. I frowned. That wasn't supposed to be active. I dropped back into the seat, pulling up the internal network diagnostics. The conductor looked over, concerned. I thought we were shut down, he said. We are, I said. But you're looking for something. No, I corrected. I'm looking for what's still looking at us. I isolated the last 5 minutes of data packets, recovered the buffer log. There it was. A ghost signature, encrypted ping, originating from a masked node. Not from inside the train, but from an external relay, routed through a mirror station that should have been decommissioned 5 years ago. Someone had used our system as a test bed, and I'd just proven it could still be hijacked, unless you knew how to fly blind. I took out my notebook, opened to the back, began scribbling numbers, ciphered timestamps, ping intervals. Elliot leaned closer. What is it? I didn't look at him. Proof. Of what? That what they said about me wasn't a flaw. It was a warning they didn't want to understand. He exhaled. You were right all along. No, I said, my pen still moving. I was honest. They just mislabeled it. A knock on the glass pulled me from the page. A man in a dark uniform, tall, badge clipped to his belt. Not railway staff, not local police, Federal Transit Oversight Bureau. I opened the door. Dr. Jensen? He asked. Yes. I need a statement. You've been named as the acting command authority during the event. I didn't act as command, I said. I acted as engineer. The system requested me. He blinked. Requested? It called me by name. The man looked uncomfortable. That's not protocol. No, I agreed. That's design. He hesitated, unsure what to write. I took the initiative. You're going to ask how I knew what to do. Why I overrode systems without authorization. Why I didn't call Central Dispatch for approval. Why I risked touching a dead manual brake relay with no gloves. His pen stopped moving. I stepped forward, voice low. So here's my statement. I knew because I built it. I overrode because the override was mine. I didn't call dispatch because your systems were compromised, and I touched the brake because someone had to. Not because I had authority, because I had the knowledge, and no one else in the cabin did. He nodded slowly, his expression blank, unreadable. Then he looked up. You'll need to explain all that again, he said. I will, I replied, in front of anyone who wants to listen, and especially the ones who don't. Later that evening, the train yard became a staging zone. Media outlets arrived, some local, some national, and just before I exited the cabin, I saw it. My name, trending. Not in whisper or rumor, but in headline font. Clara Jensen, former ethics pariah, stops runaway train. Is this the woman who warned us all? And, of course, the smear pieces too. Unstable under pressure, a dangerous hero rises. She wasn't authorized. Should she be celebrated? The old report resurfaced almost immediately. There it was again. That line. Too rigid under nonlinear threat scenarios. Stripped of context. Pasted beside my face like a scar. But this time, I was ready. I stepped down from the cabin. Elliot followed behind. Flashbulbs, microphones, voices shouting my name. I didn't answer them. But I wrote one line in my notebook before facing the crowd. When pressure breaks the world open, remember the ones who didn't. The news moved faster than the train ever had. By nightfall, my name was on 5 networks, 27 online outlets, and trending across every platform that had once made it so easy to forget me. Not anymore. Clara Jensen, the quiet woman in car 3. The engineer who took the controls. The rogue operator. The last-minute savior. The former whistleblower. They said my name like they'd discovered me, but I'd never gone missing. They just stopped looking. Some of the headlines were celebratory. Jensen's manual miracle. When tech fails, guts prevail. Others were brutal. Who let a disgraced engineer near a live system? Should the ethics report have been heeded? And there it was again. The report. Pulled from the archives. Digitized. Shared. Taken out of context. Screamed across screens in a font bolder than my defense. The same line, repeated like gospel. Too rigid for dynamic command scenarios. Susceptible to elevated stress under ambiguous threat modeling. Lacks emotional flexibility in non-binary pressure settings. I didn't need to guess who leaked it this time. I knew the format. The watermark. Elliot. Again. We were in the processing lounge, Temporary holding while transit and federal authorities coordinated passenger interviews. The room smelled of vending machine coffee and last-minute apologies. Elliot sat across from me, scrolling his phone, face paler than I'd seen since we were kids, and he lied about breaking our neighbor's fence. I stared at him until he noticed. He didn't smile. "Clara," he started. I held up a hand. "No spin, Elliot. Just truth." He looked around as if searching for a more favorable setting. There wasn't one. "The report wasn't supposed to resurface," he said. "Not like this. But you still had it, still shared it, still weaponized it." His throat moved in a slow, reluctant swallow. "It wasn't malicious. It was protection." "For who?" He didn't answer. I stood. My voice dropped to a frequency only he would hear. "You leaked that report 6 years ago to block me from the policy board. You claimed I was unstable. You said I would jeopardize cohesion. You did it again now, because you didn't want the world to forget you were the one with the title, the interviews, the suits." "That's not true," he whispered. I leaned closer. "You weren't afraid I'd fail. You were afraid I'd succeed in silence." He broke. Not loudly. No drama. Just sat back down, like a man whose arguments had finally run out of furniture to stand on. My attorney arrived an hour later. Helena Cho. Sharp, calm, and deeply unimpressed by political games. "They've opened a preliminary inquiry," she said, sitting beside me. "Not criminal, yet. But the Transit Bureau wants to know why you acted without clearance." "I didn't act," I said. "I responded." She smiled slightly. "That's a good line. We'll use it." Helena placed a file on the table, thin, precise. "More importantly, we're issuing a legal response to the leak. The ethics report was never meant to be public. It violates your rights under both employment and data protection law. We'll press for retraction, full correction, and an internal investigation." I nodded. "Also," she continued, "we'll issue a public statement. 1 paragraph, minimal emotion, maximum fact." "I already have it," I said, reaching into my notebook. She raised an eyebrow. "Of course I did." I tore out the page, handed it over. She read it, then looked at me like she hadn't expected that level of precision. The report in question was based on a simulated threat profile, not real-world performance. The incident aboard Train 904 was a real-world threat. My choices are now part of a black box record. If those facts remain uncomfortable, it's because they contradict a narrative, not the truth. Helena smiled. "No edits needed." That night, Elliot came to me again. This time, no coffee cup. No apology rehearsed. Just a man holding something in his hands. An envelope. "Open it," he said quietly. I did. Inside was a printed statement signed, "Elliot Jensen formally relinquishing any future right to comment publicly or privately on my mental fitness, technical history, or ethical assessments." It was notarized. He watched me as I read. "I can't take back what I did," he said. "No," I agreed. "But you can stop doing it." He nodded. And, for the first time in our adult lives, he stepped back. Not from the moment, from me. I went home that night alone. I turned off every screen, every alert, every whisper of praise or doubt. I sat in the dark with my notebook. Wrote just 3 lines. "The report does not define me. The data does. And I have the black box now. Let the world argue. I'd already recorded the truth." I returned to the yard at dawn. No cameras, no microphones. Just me and the smell of scorched concrete, metal fatigue, and the lingering echo of chaos that now lived only in the memory of a black box recorder. The tracks still bore the scars, gouges in the steel, streaks of melted brake composite, fractured ballast stones embedded deep in the seams like old trauma. But the train? It was intact. Parked in quiet dignity, no longer a machine of crisis but a monument to what held when everything else tried to give way. The transit authority had cordoned off the yard with tape and pylons, but I had clearance now. Not because of title or privilege, because they'd realized I was the only person who still understood the skeleton of the system. The conductor from that night met me by the switch controls. He looked different in daylight. Younger. Less ghosted. "I heard the final velocity reading," he said. 34 kilometers per hour. "That's what it felt like," I replied. "You know what that means, right?" he asked. "It means we landed." He smiled, soft and unsure. "No. It means you landed us." I walked the length of the train in silence. Each car stood like a memory marker. Car 3, where I sat as Elliot tried to provoke a reaction. Car 5, where a man died and was pulled back to life by strangers compressing his chest. The front cabin, where I felt the resistance of steel speak, not in words, but in vibration and heat. And I'd answered it with action. And at the very end of it all, the wall. The one we'd stopped 7 meters short of, close enough that you could still see it in the security camera feed. A gray slab of consequence that never touched us, but would never quite leave us either. Later that morning, I was called into a review chamber. A long table, polished wood, stainless steel pictures, nameplates. A screen at the far end showing the video overlay. Train speed, brake engagement timestamps, vibration data. The black box playback had begun. The committee, 5 board members, 1 federal observer, and 2 policy auditors, watched as the incident unfolded in blue and green telemetry. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The data was saying everything. The moments of manual override. The pitch changes I'd triggered by hand. The counter trim inputs. The left brake engagement at second 907, the fuel dump at second 923. The exact moment velocity dipped below critical. And finally, the stillness. 7 meters. Silence on the feed. Then the voice. My voice. Hold. Followed by nothing. Followed by everything. When it ended, the room sat in stillness. One of the policy auditors, gray suit, expression unreadable, spoke first. "Dr. Jensen, you deviated from protocol." "Yes," I said. "You engaged an outdated emergency system without command authorization." "I did." "You hardwired a relay with no gloves." "I had to." "You redirected the train to a non-certified track." "Yes." "You forced a mechanical override after the auto system had been compromised." I nodded. He leaned forward. "Why?" I met his eyes. "Because the system failed, and protocol does not fly a train. People do." There was a pause. Then, from the Federal Observer at the far end, came a single word. "Understood." Elliot was there, in the back, watching, listening. He didn't speak this time. He didn't need to. The data had already outpaced his narrative. The black box was louder than legacy. And truth, when recorded properly, does not require defense. They released the final report 2 days later. I read it in my kitchen, alone, with coffee that hadn't been reheated. The wording was cautious but clear. Dr. Clara Jensen's decisions were unorthodox but technically sound. Her intervention likely prevented a mass casualty event. We recommend no disciplinary action. The words I cared about were in the final line. Her performance reaffirms the value of manual systems literacy under duress. That was the fight I'd been having for 15 years. Not about ego, about memory. Machines forget. Protocols age. Networks fail. But people, if trained, if trusted, can hold the line. A week later, I returned to the academy. Not as a guest, not for a tribute, to work. They offered me a position I never asked for, but one I was finally ready to accept. Instructor. Emergency response training. Manual override systems. Psychological crisis resistance. The room was small. 12 students. Some ex-military. Some commercial. One girl barely out of engineering school who wore her doubt like a second skin. The first thing I told them was simple. You're not here to become heroes. You're here to become calm under pressure. Because calm, when steel starts screaming, is the rarest skill we have. After class, one of the students lingered. She wore a navy jacket, her sleeves pulled over nervous hands. I was on the train, she said. Which car? Car 6. We stood in silence for a second. I didn't know what to do, she admitted. Everyone was panicking, but I kept looking forward, toward the front. I didn't know who was up there. I just believed someone was. I nodded. You're here now, I said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. Black leather, unmarked. She opened to a blank page. Where should I start? She asked. I smiled. Right then, I felt something shift. Not applause, not redemption, legacy. Start with friction, I said, and record what held. The formal inquiry was scheduled for 0900 hours sharp, housed inside a tiered auditorium usually reserved for procurement hearings and ministerial press briefings. But this time, it was different. It was standing room only. Not because the event was open to the public, it wasn't, but because word had spread across departments, industries, even international transit circles. Not about a malfunction, not about a crash, but about something far more rare, a decision made in silence that saved hundreds of lives. I arrived 10 minutes early, not with a lawyer, not with a publicist, just my black logbook, an archived thumb drive, and a small worn notebook from my early academy years, still marked with torque conversions and handwritten formulas I no longer needed to look up. A clerk offered to carry my materials. I declined. That notebook had carried me farther than clearance badges or government titles ever had. Let it walk with me now. At the front panel sat the Transportation Oversight Board, 7 members, 3 technical advisors, 2 legal observers, and a neutral moderator from the International Rail Integrity Coalition, a woman named Marta Siglov, who had once authored the very contingency report Elliot buried years ago. I recognized her. She didn't blink. The first 30 minutes were procedural. Timelines, chain of command, emergency dispatch logs. Then they moved to the sequence. The projected simulation showed the tunnel collapse at 0813, the automatic system failure at 0814, the failed digital fallback engagement at 0815, and then silence. One of the advisors spoke. There is a gap from 0815 to 0821 before emergency reroute signal registers. The moderator leaned forward. Can you account for that gap? I stood, reached into the logbook, pulled out my notes. Every second, every action, every anomaly filtered and addressed. I walked them through each one. The power dump, the false signal cascade, the inertial override. I calculated manually with no comms. The noise ratio spike indicating sabotage, or a misrouted subroutine. The reroute decision made from a line-of-sight schematic I had memorized a decade ago. No dramatics, no applause, just numbers, choices, cause, effect. The committee asked no questions, not until one final clip played. A voice, distorted by static, faint beneath a conductor's mic. Is Dr. Jensen in car 3? Get me Clara Jensen now. Marta Siglov turned to Elliot, seated behind me as an observer. Mr. Jensen, were you aware that your sister was being summoned to take control? He didn't flinch. He cleared his throat. I was surprised. I hadn't considered her for that role anymore. You mean, you dismissed her? He gave a stiff nod. In those years, I thought Clara was brilliant but inflexible. And now? He looked at me. I now understand that integrity isn't inflexibility. It's clarity under pressure. And my sister is clarity. He sat back down. The moderator faced me again. Dr. Jensen, you deviated from multiple lines of protocol. You assumed control in a system explicitly trained to resist unilateral override. Yes. Do you believe you were authorized to take that risk? I inhaled slowly. My clearance gave me access to systems, not authority. Then why? I closed the logbook and let my hand rest on it. Because 206 people didn't need a title. They needed someone who knew how the system thinks, who could read it without blinking. I let the silence settle. Because no one else moved, and I was done asking permission from people who weren't holding the controls. There was no further discussion, no applause, no admonishment, just the gavel. The inquiry finds no basis for disciplinary action. And the final line read aloud. The board acknowledges Dr. Clara Jensen's conduct as an exemplar of independent engineering judgment under extreme conditions. Outside, Elliot followed me into the corridor. The same corridor where, years ago, he'd thrown me under a different kind of train. But this time, he held something in his hand. An envelope. I had them reassign the family fund, he said. The Innovation Trust? He nodded. It's yours. To direct. However you want. I looked down at the envelope but didn't take it. Why now? He paused. Because I spent years pretending you were the flaw in the system. Turns out, you were the integrity check. That night, I went home not to celebrate, but to begin designing. 6 months later, the plaque was mounted. Not in a museum, not in a government hall, but in the corner of a modest engineering workshop on the edge of Leipzig. Beneath a simple wooden shelf lined with notebooks, each spine dated and smudged from years of handling. It read, "This room is dedicated to Dr. Clara Jensen, who rewrote the manual without erasing the truth." The Jensen Initiative had begun with one question: what if clarity under pressure was teachable? We didn't open with theory or doctrine, we opened with failure simulations. Then asked, what did you miss? Why? What if you couldn't ask anyone for help? Every candidate was given a blank logbook, no laptops for the first 3 weeks. Handwritten notes only, because if you can't trace your thinking under pressure, you'll never trust your instincts when it matters. In the third cohort, a woman sat alone after class. Mid-20s, sharp-eyed, quiet. The kind who memorizes everyone's movements before she speaks. I recognized the silence. I had lived in it. She approached with a folder, hesitated, then asked, "Were you really in car 3? I nodded once. She blinked like she wasn't sure whether to believe it, or whether it even mattered. My brother says I'm too slow in crises, that I hesitate. What do you say? I say, I want to know the system like it's part of me. I smiled, reached into my bag, pulled out a brand new logbook, cover still stiff, handed it to her. Start your record. Write down what the noise doesn't say. She ran her fingers over the edges like it was something sacred, then whispered, "Were you scared?" I didn't answer immediately. Then, not of the crash, of what people would say if I touched the system again. And now? Now I teach them how to touch it. Back in my office, I stared at the shelf. 10 books from the early years, one from the day of the hearing, and one newer volume still being written, with train schematics, student insights, and questions the manuals never asked. I placed it beside the others. There was no metal, no newspaper clipping, just an embossed label on the spine. Car 3. Decision point. Outside the window, an electric train passed along the hillside. I didn't know where it was going, but I knew someone was watching the gauges, checking the redundancy, trusting the readings. Because someone once taught them how. And someone, somewhere, had just picked up a pen to start a notebook, in silence. For the moment they might need to take the controls.